The courtroom fell silent as Elliot Monroe dropped his yellow cleaning gloves onto the polished mahogany table, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the packed federal courthouse. His calloused hands, still damp from scrubbing the third-floor bathrooms just minutes ago, now gripped a manila folder marked Case File 417B with such intensity that his knuckles had gone pale against his dark skin. The cameras clicked frantically. The jury leaned forward. And Victoria Ashford, America's most powerful tech billionaire, looked up at the 52-year-old janitor standing beside her with tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. "Your Honor," Elliot's deep voice cut through the suffocating tension, "I will defend her." Judge Patricia Hernandez removed her glasses slowly, her expression a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. 23 years on the federal bench, and she'd never witnessed anything like this. Behind her, the Great Seal of the United States seemed to shine brighter, as if even the Republic itself was watching this impossible moment unfold. "Mr. The judge's voice carried across the ornate Manhattan courtroom. "Monroe. Elliot Monroe, Your Honor." He stood straighter, his navy blue janitor's uniform with the name tag, Elliot, sewn above the breast pocket, somehow looking dignified in that moment. "I've worked as a custodian in this courthouse for 14 years, and I have evidence that will prove Ms. Ashford's innocence." The prosecution table erupted. Lead prosecutor Marcus Whitfield, a shark in a $5,000 suit, shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is absolutely unprecedented. This man has no legal credentials, no authority to—" "I have the truth," Elliot interrupted, his voice steady, but carrying the weight of a father who'd fought too many battles in life to back down now. "And in this country, that still means something." Victoria Ashford couldn't breathe. Just 20 minutes ago, she'd watched her own attorney, Gerald Hutchinson, the man her company had paid $8 million over the past year, gather his briefcase and walk out of the courtroom. No explanation, no warning. Just the cold click of his Italian leather shoes against marble as he abandoned her to face fraud charges that could send her to prison for 25 years. The charges were simple on paper: embezzlement of $847 million from her own company, Ashford Technologies. The prosecution claimed she'd funneled money into offshore accounts while laying off 3,000 employees. The evidence seemed airtight: bank transfers, forged signatures, encrypted communications. Her face had been plastered across every news channel for 6 months, transformed from America's self-made success story to the billionaire who stole from the poor. But it was all a lie, a meticulously crafted conspiracy orchestrated by someone inside her own company, and until this moment, she'd had no way to prove it. Now, a janitor, a man she'd never even noticed in the 14 years he'd worked in this building, stood beside her holding what might be her only hope. "Mr. Monroe," Judge Hernandez leaned forward, her dark eyes sharp with legal scrutiny, "you understand that what you're suggesting is highly irregular. This court cannot simply—" "Your Honor, with respect." Elliot opened the folder, his hand surprisingly steady. 3 nights ago, I was cleaning the offices on the 18th floor of the Ashford Technologies building. My second job," he added, a flicker of something, pride mixed with exhaustion, crossing his weathered face. "I empty trash cans. I scrub floors. And sometimes I find things people think they've thrown away." He pulled out a stack of documents, each one protected in a clear plastic sleeve. "These are internal communications between Victoria Ashford's chief financial officer, Robert Langston, and an offshore investment firm called Meridian Holdings. They detail a systematic plan to frame Ms. Ashford for embezzlement while Langston transferred company funds to his own accounts." The courtroom exploded into chaos. Reporters scrambled for their phones. The jury buzzed with whispers. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth, her carefully constructed composure crumbling. "Order!" Judge Hernandez's gavel cracked 3 times. "Order in this court!" Marcus Whitfield's face had gone from confident tan to pale gray. "Your Honor, these documents are inadmissible. Chain of custody has been completely compromised. This man could have fabricated—" "I also have this." Elliot pulled out a small flash drive, holding it up for the court to see. Security footage from the Ashford building dated 3 nights ago. It shows me retrieving these documents from a shredder bin in Mr. Langston's office. Unedited, time-stamped, and verified by the building's security system. He turned to look at Victoria for the first time since he'd entered the courtroom. Her blue eyes, red-rimmed from crying, met his dark brown ones. In that moment, something passed between them. Not romance, but recognition. Two people from completely different worlds, both fighting to survive in a system designed to crush them. "I have a daughter," Elliot said quietly, though his voice carried to every corner of the silent courtroom. "She's 12 years old. Her name is Maya. And 3 years ago, when her mother left us, we had nothing. I was working one job, barely keeping the lights on. Then Ms. Ashford's company created a scholarship program for children of courthouse and government employees." He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening with emotion. "Maya got that scholarship. It pays for her private school, her books, her music lessons. Because of Victoria Ashford's generosity, my daughter has a chance at a future I could never give her on a janitor's salary." Victoria's tears fell freely now, mascara tracking down her cheeks. She hadn't just created that program as a tax write-off. She'd done it because she understood what it meant to grow up with nothing, to fight for every opportunity. "So when I saw these documents," Elliot continued, his voice growing stronger, "when I realized what had really happened, I knew I couldn't stay silent. I don't care if it cost me my job. I don't care if powerful people come after me. That woman," he gestured to Victoria, "she saved my daughter's life. And I will not watch her be destroyed by lies." Judge Hernandez studied Elliot Monroe for a long moment. She'd seen thousands of people pass through her courtroom, slick lawyers, desperate defendants, calculating criminals. But something about this man, standing in his janitor's uniform with his cleaning gloves on the table and his daughter's future in his heart, made her pause. "Mr. Whitfield," she said slowly, "do you have CFO Robert Langston available for testimony?" The prosecutor's silence was damning. "I'll take that as a no." Judge Hernandez turned back to Elliot. "Mr. Monroe, I'm going to do something I've never done in my career. I'm going to admit your evidence provisionally and order an immediate investigation into these allegations. If what you say is true, this case may require a mistrial and new charges filed against Mr. Langston." She looked at Victoria. "Ms. Ashford, you're released on your own recognizance pending this investigation. Court is adjourned for 48 hours. The gavel fell. Elliot's legs nearly gave out. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. Victoria stood shakily, reaching out to steady herself on the table. Then she turned to face the man who'd just saved her life. This stranger in a janitor's uniform, who'd risked everything for the truth. "Why?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "You don't even know me." Elliot looked at her with eyes that had seen too much hardship, too much struggle, but still held an unshakable sense of justice. "I know what it's like to be abandoned when you need help the most, Ms. Ashford. I know what it's like when everyone turns their back on you because you're not worth their time." He picked up his yellow gloves. Nobody should face that alone, not even a billionaire. As federal marshals escorted Victoria out through the side exit to avoid the media frenzy, she looked back one last time at Elliot Monroe. He was already being swarmed by reporters, cameras flashing in his face, questions being shouted from every direction. But he stood tall, his janitor's uniform still pristine despite the chaos, and met her gaze one more time. In that moment, Victoria Ashford realized that the most powerful person in that courtroom hadn't been the judge, the lawyers, or even herself. It had been the man everyone else had overlooked, the janitor who dared to defend her when no one else would. Elliot Monroe had never been afraid of hard work, but he'd never imagined that doing the right thing would feel this heavy. The courthouse steps were a nightmare of flashing cameras and shouting reporters. Microphones thrust into his face like weapons, questions fired at him from every direction, each one more aggressive than the last. "Mr. Monroe, did Victoria Ashford pay you to bring forward this evidence? How much did she offer you?" Are you aware you could face charges for tampering with evidence? Elliot pushed through the crowd, his jaw clenched, his yellow cleaning gloves still clutched in one hand like a talisman. Behind him, his supervisor, Carl Davidson, a pot-bellied man with 28 years in courthouse maintenance, grabbed his arm roughly. "Monroe, what the hell were you thinking?" Carl's face was red with fury and fear. "You just humiliated the prosecution in there. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I told the truth," Elliot said quietly, still moving toward the street where he'd parked his 15-year-old Honda Civic that morning. It felt like a lifetime ago. "The truth?" Carl laughed bitterly. "The truth is you're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Turn in your keys, your badge, your uniforms. You're done." The words hit Elliot like a physical blow. 14 years. 14 years of arriving at 5 a.m., of scrubbing toilets, of mopping floors, of being invisible to everyone who walked past him. 14 years of steady paychecks that kept his daughter fed, clothed, educated. Gone in an instant. "I understand," Elliot said, his voice hollow. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his courthouse ID badge, the photo showing a younger version of himself, still hopeful about the future. He handed it to Carl without another word. As he walked away, one of the reporters caught up to him, a young woman with sharp eyes and a digital recorder. "Mr. Monroe, I'm Sarah Chen from the New York Tribune. Can I ask you one question?" Elliot kept walking. "I've got nothing to say." "Do you regret it?" Sarah jogged to keep up with his long strides. "Losing your job to defend a billionaire who probably won't even remember your name tomorrow?" That made Elliot stop. He turned to face her, and for the first time since leaving the courtroom, his carefully maintained composure cracked. "My daughter's name is Maya. She's 12 years old. And when she asks me what kind of man her father is, I want to be able to tell her that I stand up for what's right, even when it costs me everything." He looked directly at Sarah's recorder. "So no, I don't regret it." Then he climbed into his battered Honda and drove away, leaving the chaos of the courthouse behind. 3 hours later, Elliot sat at the small kitchen table in his 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, staring at the stack of bills spread out before him. Rent due in 2 weeks. Maya's school tuition payment coming up. The car insurance he could barely afford even with 2 jobs that he no longer had. The Ashford Technologies building had called 30 minutes after he left the courthouse. His evening custodial position, the one that paid for Maya's music lessons and kept them above water, was terminated immediately. Security concerns, they'd said. More like they were terrified of being associated with the man who'd exposed their CFO. The afternoon light slanted through the kitchen window, illuminating the photographs on the refrigerator. Maya's school pictures, Maya at her piano recital. Maya smiling, always smiling, because she didn't know how close to the edge they always were. Elliot's phone buzzed, an unknown number. He almost didn't answer. "Mr. Monroe?" The voice was female, professional, unfamiliar. "This is Patricia Reeves. I'm Ms. Ashford's executive assistant. She'd like to meet with you tonight if you're available." Elliot closed his eyes. "Tell Ms. Ashford I appreciate the thought, but I'm not looking for charity." "This isn't charity, Mr. Monroe. She wants to thank you properly, and she has information about Robert Langston that you need to hear, for your own safety." Those last 3 words made Elliot's blood run cold. "What do you mean, my safety?" "Please, Mr. Monroe. 8 o'clock, the Peninsula Hotel, Suite 2408. Security will be expecting you." The line went dead. The Peninsula Hotel was not a place where people like Elliot Monroe typically set foot. The lobby alone probably cost more to decorate than he'd earned in his entire life. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, doormen in uniforms more expensive than his Sunday suit. He'd gone home first, changed out of his janitor's uniform into his only decent outfit, khaki slacks and a button-down shirt that Maya had picked out for him last Father's Day. Even that felt inadequate as he approached the front desk. "I'm here to see Ms. Ashford," he said quietly. "Suite 2408. The concierge's expression didn't change. professionally neutral, but Elliot saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. The janitor from the courthouse. The news had already spread. "Of course, sir. The elevators are to your right." 2 security guards stood outside Suite 2408. They checked his ID, scanned him with a handheld metal detector, then knocked twice before opening the door. Victoria Ashford stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, still wearing the white suit from the courthouse, but with her jacket removed. She looked smaller somehow, more human, without the cameras and the courtroom drama surrounding her. "Mr. Monroe?" She turned, and Elliot was struck by how exhausted she looked. "Thank you for coming." "Ms. Ashford." He stayed near the door, uncomfortable in the luxury suite with its expensive furniture and view that probably cost more per night than his monthly rent. "Please sit." She gestured to the leather sofa. "And call me Victoria. I think we're past formalities, don't you?" Elliot sat cautiously on the edge of the sofa. Victoria poured 2 glasses of water from a crystal pitcher, not champagne, not wine, just water, and handed him one before sitting across from him. "I owe you my life," she said simply. "Everything I've built, everything I am, would have been destroyed if you hadn't spoken up today." "You don't owe me anything," Elliot replied. "I just did what was right. And lost both your jobs because of it." Victoria's voice was sharp with anger, not at him but at the injustice of it. "Yes, I already know. I made some calls. Your courthouse supervisor terminated you immediately, and Ashford Technologies followed suit within an hour." She leaned forward, her blue eyes intense. "I'm going to fix that. I'm going to make sure you're compensated for what you've lost, and I'm going to—" "No." Elliot's voice was firm. "I appreciate the offer, Ms. Ashford, but I don't want your money. I don't want to be in your debt." "Then what do you want?" Victoria asked, genuinely confused. In her world, every problem could be solved with money. Every person had a price. "I want my daughter to grow up in a world where people do the right thing because it's right, not because there's a reward waiting." Elliot set down his water glass. "Your assistant said you had information about Langston, about my safety." Victoria's expression darkened. "Robert Langston is dangerous, Elliot. More dangerous than you realize. The money he embezzled, the $847 million, it didn't just go into offshore accounts. He was laundering it for some very bad people. Russian oligarchs, Chinese criminal syndicates, people who don't like loose ends. And I just became a loose end," Elliot said slowly. "You became the thread that could unravel their entire operation." Victoria stood and walked to a briefcase on the desk. She pulled out another folder, this one much thicker than the one Elliot had brought to court. "The FBI came to see me 2 hours ago. They've been investigating Langston for 8 months. Your evidence was the final piece they needed." She handed him the folder. Inside were photographs. Langston meeting with known criminals, financial records showing massive transfers, and at the bottom, a surveillance photo that made Elliot's heart stop. It was a picture of his apartment building, taken yesterday, with a red circle drawn around his daughter's bedroom window. "They know where you live," Victoria said quietly. "They know about Maya." Elliot's hand shook as he held the photograph. All the courage he'd felt in the courtroom, all the righteous conviction that had carried him through the day suddenly felt like foolish naivety. He'd thought he was just standing up for justice. He hadn't realized he was painting a target on his daughter's back. "What do I do?" His voice cracked. "How do I protect her?" Victoria sat beside him on the sofa, closer this time. "You let me help you, not as charity, not as payment, but as one parent to another. You have children?" Elliot looked at her in surprise. "I did." Victoria's voice went soft with old grief. "A son. He died when he was 8. Leukemia. It's been 12 years, but—" She touched a small gold locket around her neck. "Being a parent never stops even after they're gone." In that moment, the billionaire and the janitor found common ground. Not in money or status, but in the fierce, terrifying love that comes with having a child depending on you. I have a safe house, Victoria continued. Upstate, completely off the grid. You and Maya can stay there until the FBI arrests Langston and dismantles his network. I'll have security with you 24/7. And in the meantime, I'm hiring the best lawyers in the country to make sure you're protected legally. Why? Elliot asked. Why go to all this trouble for a janitor you never even noticed before today? Victoria looked at him with something between admiration and sadness. Because you saw me, Elliot. When everyone else abandoned me, when my own lawyer walked away, when the whole world had decided I was guilty, you saw the truth. You didn't see a billionaire or a criminal. You saw a human being who needed help. She stood and extended her hand. Let me return the favor. Elliot looked at her hand for a long moment. He thought about Maya, safe in their apartment right now with Mrs. Chen from downstairs watching her. He thought about the men who might be planning to use his daughter as leverage. He thought about the choice between his pride and his daughter's safety. There was no choice at all. He took Victoria's hand and shook it firmly. Okay, but this is temporary, and when this is over, I'm finding my own way again. Victoria smiled, the first genuine smile Elliot had seen from her. I wouldn't expect anything less. As Elliot left the Peninsula Hotel that night, he didn't notice the black SUV parked across the street. He didn't see the man inside raising a camera, capturing his face. But Victoria did. From her window 24 floors up, she watched the SUV pull away and felt cold dread settle in her chest. The war for the truth had just begun, and the casualties were already mounting. Maya Monroe had her father's eyes. Dark, intelligent, and far too perceptive for a 12-year-old girl. She sat in the back seat of the armored SUV, her small backpack clutched in her lap, watching the city lights blur past the tinted windows. Her father sat beside her, his hand wrapped protectively around hers, but she could feel the tension radiating from him like heat from pavement in summer. Daddy, she said quietly, are we in trouble? Elliot looked down at his daughter, at her neat braids that he'd learned to do himself after her mother left, at the school uniform she wore with such pride, at the innocence that he'd tried so hard to preserve. And he made a decision that every parent dreads. He told her the truth. Yes, baby girl, we are, but I'm going to keep you safe, I promise. Maya nodded solemnly, squeezing his hand tighter. She didn't cry. She'd learned early in life that crying didn't fix problems. Her father had taught her that by example, working 2 jobs without complaint, getting up every morning with a smile even when she knew he was exhausted. In the front seat, Victoria Ashford made quiet phone calls, coordinating security details and FBI protection. Beside her, Marcus Stone, head of her personal security team and former Navy SEAL, drove with military precision through the midnight streets toward the Lincoln Tunnel. They'd waited until 2 a.m. to move. Maya had been pulled from her bed, given 5 minutes to pack essentials, and hustled out of the apartment building through the basement service entrance. Mrs. Chen had been paid generously for her silence and given a number to call if anyone came asking questions. It should have been enough. They'd been careful, professional, invisible. But Robert Langston hadn't become a successful criminal by being careless. The attack came on Route 17, 40 minutes outside the city. They were passing through a stretch of highway flanked by dense forest when the first SUV rammed them from behind. The impact threw everyone forward against their seatbelts. Maya screamed. Elliot wrapped his arms around her, shielding her body with his. Contact rear, Marcus shouted, accelerating hard. 2 vehicles, possible 3. A second SUV pulled alongside them, and Elliot saw the window rolling down, saw the glint of metal in the darkness. He didn't think. Instinct took over. He threw himself over Maya, covering her completely just as bullets shattered the window. The armored glass held, spiderwebbing but not breaking. More gunfire. The SUV swerved violently as Marcus executed evasive maneuvers that would have been impressive if they weren't so terrifying. Victoria was on her phone shouting coordinates to someone. We're under attack. Route 17 northbound, mile marker 43. We need police now. Another impact from behind. The SUV fishtailed, tires screaming. Maya was crying now, her small body shaking against her father's chest. Elliot kept whispering in her ear the same words over and over. "I've got you. Daddy's got you. You're safe. I've got you." Marcus made a split-second decision. He jerked the wheel hard right, sending them off the highway and onto a narrow service road that disappeared into the forest. The attacking vehicles followed, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. "There's an old state park maintenance station 2 miles ahead," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "It's abandoned, but it has concrete barriers. We can make a stand there until police arrive." "How long until police?" Victoria demanded. 12 minutes. "We might not have 12 minutes. She was right. Another burst of gunfire raked across the rear of the SUV. One of the tires exploded. Marcus fought to control the vehicle as it lurched violently to the left, but physics won. They crashed through a guardrail and down a shallow embankment, slamming into a massive oak tree with a sound like the world ending. The airbags deployed. For a moment, there was only the hiss of steam from the damaged engine and the ringing in Elliot's ears. Then Maya's crying brought him back to reality. "Everyone out. Now." Marcus kicked open his door. The attacking SUVs were already stopping on the road above them. They had maybe 30 seconds. Elliot unbuckled Maya and lifted her out of the vehicle. She was crying but moving, which meant she wasn't seriously hurt. Victoria stumbled out behind them, blood running down her temple from where she'd hit her head, but her eyes were alert and focused. "Into the trees." Marcus pointed to the dense forest. "Go deep, find cover, stay quiet, I'll hold them here." "No!" Victoria grabbed his arm. "You can't." "Ma'am, with respect. This is my job." Marcus pulled a pistol from his shoulder holster and checked the magazine. "Get them to safety, that's an order." Elliot saw the understanding pass between Victoria and her security chief. This was goodbye. Marcus Stone was about to give his life to buy them time. "Marcus," Victoria's voice broke. "Thank you. For everything." He gave her a tight smile. "Been an honor, Ms. Ashford." Then he turned toward the approaching figures and opened fire. Elliot grabbed Victoria's hand and ran, carrying Maya in his other arm. The forest was pitch black, branches whipping at their faces, roots trying to trip them with every step. Behind them, gunfire echoed through the trees. Marcus's measured shots answered by the staccato bursts of automatic weapons. They ran until Elliot's lungs burned, until Maya's crying had turned to exhausted whimpers, until the gunfire behind them finally stopped in a way that made his heart sink. They collapsed behind a massive fallen log, gasping for breath. Victoria pulled out her phone. The screen was cracked but still working. No signal. They were in a dead zone. "We need to keep moving," she whispered, her voice shaking. "They'll be looking for us." "No." Elliot's voice was firm. "Maya can't run anymore. We need to hide." He was right. His daughter was trembling with exhaustion and fear, her uniform torn, her face streaked with tears and dirt. They couldn't outrun trained killers in the dark forest. Elliot's eyes had adjusted to the darkness enough to make out a depression in the ground about 20 feet away, probably an old erosion gully. "There. We can cover ourselves with leaves and branches." They scrambled into the gully, pressing themselves against the cold earth. Elliot pulled branches and dead leaves over them, creating a makeshift camouflage. Maya lay between him and Victoria, her small body sandwiched between the two adults. And then they waited in the darkness, listening to the sounds of men searching the forest for them. Footsteps crunched through dead leaves. Flashlight beams swept overhead, radio chatter in Russian and English. The searchers were methodical, professional. These weren't street thugs. These were military-trained operatives. "Spread out. They can't have gone far. The girl will slow them down." The voice was close, too close. Elliot felt Maya stiffen against him and he squeezed her gently, willing her to stay absolutely still. A flashlight beam passed directly over their hiding spot. Elliot held his breath. His hand found Victoria's in the darkness and she gripped it with surprising strength. The beam moved on, More footsteps. More voices. Then gradually, slowly, the sounds began to recede as the search moved deeper into the forest. They lay there for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Finally, Victoria's phone buzzed. Just once, quietly. She pulled it out carefully. A single bar of signal had appeared. She typed frantically. Attacked on Route 17. Security down. In forest hiding. Send help. She hit send and immediately powered off the phone to prevent it from being traced. Now we wait, she whispered. Maya had stopped crying, but Elliot could feel her rapid heartbeat against his chest. He kissed the top of her head and whispered, You're being so brave, baby girl. So brave. I'm so proud of you. I'm scared, Daddy, Maya whispered back. I know. I am too. But we're together, and that's what matters. In the darkness of that forest, covered in dirt and leaves and fear, Elliot Monroe realized something profound. This was the price of truth. Not just his jobs, not just his safety, but potentially his life and his daughter's future. He'd thought standing up in that courtroom was the hardest thing he'd ever done. He'd been wrong. This was harder. Lying in the cold earth, listening to men who wanted to kill them search the forest, holding his terrified daughter and the broken billionaire who'd become an unlikely ally. But he still didn't regret it. Because Maya needed to see that her father was a man who stood for something, even when it cost everything. Especially when it cost everything. Beside him, Victoria's voice was barely audible. Elliot, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I should never have dragged you into this. You didn't drag me anywhere, Elliot replied quietly. I walked into that courtroom on my own 2 feet. I made my choice. A choice that might kill you and your daughter. A choice that showed my daughter what kind of man her father is. He squeezed Maya tighter. That's worth dying for. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then, You're a better person than I ever was. No, Elliot said. I'm just a father trying to teach his daughter that character matters more than comfort. In the distance, they heard the beautiful sound of police sirens. Multiple vehicles coming fast. The FBI had gotten Victoria's message. The searchers heard it too. More radio chatter. Urgent now. Then the sounds of retreat. Engines starting. Vehicles departing at high speed. But Elliot, Victoria, and Maya stayed hidden in their gully for another 10 minutes just to be sure. When they finally emerged, covered in dirt and leaves like creatures from the forest floor, they saw flashlight beams approaching. But these were accompanied by voices shouting, FBI, show yourselves with your hands up. Elliot stood slowly, helping Maya to her feet, one arm raised while the other kept his daughter close. Victoria rose beside them, her expensive white suit now completely ruined, her face streaked with mud and blood. Federal agents, Elliot called out. We're victims, don't shoot. The flashlights converged on them. Then agents were running forward calling for paramedics, wrapping emergency blankets around their shoulders. They'd survived, barely. But as Elliot watched his daughter being checked by EMTs, as he saw Victoria giving her statement to federal agents with a haunted look in her eyes, he knew this wasn't over. Robert Langston had just made this personal. He'd gone after a 12-year-old girl. He'd killed Marcus Stone. He'd shown them all that he would burn the world down rather than face justice. And somewhere in the back of Elliot's mind, a new resolve began to form. He'd been defensive until now, reactive. But his daughter had almost died tonight because he'd spoken the truth. It was time to stop running and start fighting back. The janitor who'd saved a billionaire was about to become something more dangerous, a father with nothing left to lose. The FBI safe house in upstate New York was nothing like the Peninsula Hotel, but it felt like a fortress to Elliot Monroe. For 3 days, he and Maya had been under 24-hour protection, while federal agents built their case against Robert Langston. Victoria had a separate room down the hall recovering from a mild concussion and the emotional trauma of watching her security chief die to save them. But on the 4th morning, everything changed. Special Agent Jennifer Park knocked on Elliot's door at 6 a.m., her expression a mixture of triumph and urgency. We got him. Langston tried to flee to Moscow last night. TSA flagged his passport and we arrested him at JFK. He's in federal custody, and he's talking. Elliot sat up from the narrow bed where he'd barely slept for 3 nights, his mind racing. Talking? What do you mean talking? He's cutting a deal. Names, bank accounts, the entire network. Agent Park smiled grimly. Your evidence was the crack in the dam. Now the whole thing is flooding out. We're looking at one of the biggest financial crime busts in FBI history. And Maya? Elliot's voice was urgent. Is she safe now? The threat level has dropped significantly. Langston's associates are scattering. Most have already left the country. The immediate danger has passed. Elliot closed his eyes and exhaled a breath he felt like he'd been holding for days. His daughter was safe. That was all that mattered. But Agent Park wasn't finished. There's something else. The U.S. Attorney wants to meet with you and Ms. Ashford today. There are going to be formal charges filed, and they want you both to testify before a grand jury. I'll testify, Elliot said immediately. Whatever you need. 6 weeks later, Elliot Monroe walked up the steps of the federal courthouse in Manhattan for the second time in his life. This time, he wasn't wearing a janitor's uniform. Victoria had insisted on buying him a proper suit, not charity, she'd argued, but armor for the battle ahead. He'd finally agreed, choosing something simple and dignified in dark gray. Maya walked beside him, her hand in his, wearing her best dress. She'd insisted on coming. I want to see justice, Daddy, she'd said with a determination that reminded him so much of himself. I want to see the bad people lose. The media circus was even bigger than before. But this time the cameras weren't hostile. Elliot had become a hero in the public eye. The janitor who'd risked everything to expose corruption, who'd protected his daughter and a billionaire from assassins, who'd stood firm when everyone else had run away. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. Robert Langston sat at the defendant's table, flanked by 2 federal marshals. He'd aged 10 years in 6 weeks. His expensive suit hung loose on his frame, his confident smirk replaced by the hollow eyes of a man who knew his life was over. Victoria sat in the front row of the gallery, her own transformation equally striking. The polished billionaire armor was gone, replaced by something more authentic. She'd cut her hair shorter, wore minimal makeup, and dressed in a simple navy suit. She looked like someone who'd been through fire and survived. When her eyes met Elliot's across the courtroom, she smiled. Not the calculated smile of a CEO, but the genuine warmth of a friend who'd shared a foxhole with you. The judge entered, and the trial began. Elliot's testimony took 2 hours. He walked through every detail, finding the documents in the shredder, recognizing what they meant, making the impossible decision to speak up in court. He described losing both his jobs, the attack on Route 17, watching Marcus Stone sacrifice himself so they could escape. His voice never wavered, even when the defense attorney tried to rattle him with aggressive questions. Elliot had faced down killers in a dark forest. A lawyer's theatrics didn't scare him anymore. When it was Victoria's turn, she delivered testimony that was equally powerful. She detailed Langston's systematic betrayal, how he'd manipulated her company's finances, how he'd framed her while stealing from thousands of employees who'd trusted Ashford Technologies. But the most impactful moment came when the prosecution introduced a surprise witness, Gerald Hutchinson, Victoria's former attorney who'd walked out of her first trial. Hutchinson took the stand looking 20 years older, his expensive suit unable to hide the weight of his guilt. Mr. Hutchinson, the prosecutor began, can you explain why you abandoned your client, Victoria Ashford, during her trial? Hutchinson's voice was barely audible. Robert Langston contacted me 3 days before the trial. He had evidence that I'd made some questionable decisions in previous cases. Tax issues, ethical violations. He threatened to expose me unless I withdrew from Victoria's defense at the critical moment. The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers. So you were blackmailed into abandoning your client when she needed you most? Yes. Hutchinson looked at Victoria, tears in his eyes. I'm so sorry. I was weak. I was a coward. And I let an innocent woman face prison because I was too afraid to lose my reputation. He turned to face Elliot in the gallery. But you weren't afraid. A janitor with everything to lose stood up when a lawyer with everything to protect ran away. I've practiced law for 30 years, and I never understood what justice meant until I watched you stand in that courtroom and defend her. The weight of those words hung in the air. Elliot felt Maya squeeze his hand, her eyes shining with pride. The trial lasted 3 more days. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, witness testimony, forensic accounting that showed exactly how Langston had stolen $847 million and framed Victoria for his crimes. When the jury returned with their verdict after only 4 hours of deliberation, no one was surprised. On all counts, we find the defendant, Robert Langston, guilty. The courtroom exploded with applause. The judge gavelled for order but didn't try very hard to stop it. Justice, real justice, was too rare to not celebrate. Langston was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. His assets were seized. His co-conspirators were being prosecuted across 3 countries. The empire of corruption he'd built had crumbled completely. 3 months after the trial, on a crisp October morning, Elliot Monroe stood in front of a building he'd never expected to see, the new headquarters of the Ashford Foundation. Victoria had restructured her entire company after the trial. Ashford Technologies now had an independent ethics board, transparent financial reporting, and a new mission statement focused on supporting working families and educational opportunities. But her biggest project was this: a foundation dedicated to helping people like Elliot, working-class heroes who did the right thing and paid the price for it. The Marcus Stone Center for Justice and Integrity, Victoria said, standing beside Elliot as they looked up at the bronze letters above the entrance. Named after the man who gave his life protecting us. It will provide legal support, financial assistance, and job placement for whistleblowers, witnesses, and anyone who faces retaliation for standing up for truth. Elliot felt his throat tighten. Marcus would have liked that. And this, Victoria handed him a folder, is a job offer. Director of Community Outreach. You'd work directly with people who've lost everything for doing the right thing. Help them rebuild. Show them they're not alone. Elliot opened the folder and nearly dropped it when he saw the salary figure. Victoria, this is what you're worth, she said firmly. What you've always been worth. The world just couldn't see it before. I don't have a college degree. I don't have business experience. I'm a janitor. You're a man who stood in a courtroom and defended someone everyone else had abandoned. You're a father who protected his daughter while hiding in a forest from killers. You're someone who understands what it means to lose everything. Victoria's eyes were bright with emotion. That makes you more qualified than any MBA in the country. Maya came running up, having explored the building with Victoria's assistant. Daddy, they have a whole library upstairs and a music room with pianos. Elliot knelt down to his daughter's level. What do you think, baby girl? Should Daddy take this job? Maya looked at the building, then at Victoria, then back at her father. Will you still have time to help me with homework? Every single night, Elliot promised. Then yes. Maya hugged him tight. I'm proud of you, Daddy. Those 4 words meant more than any salary, any title, any recognition. His daughter was proud of him. He'd shown her that integrity mattered, that standing up for truth had value, that one person could make a difference. That was worth everything. The dedication ceremony for the Marcus Stone Center was attended by hundreds of people. FBI agents who'd worked the case, employees from Ashford Technologies, journalists who'd covered the trial, and regular people, janitors, teachers, nurses, construction workers, who'd heard about Elliot's story and wanted to see proof that heroes could look like them. Gerald Hutchinson came too, no longer practicing law but volunteering his time to train young attorneys on legal ethics. He shook Elliot's hand with genuine humility. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like. Sarah Chin, the reporter who'd interviewed Elliot on the courthouse steps, had written a book about the case called The Janitor Who Saved Justice. It had become a bestseller, and she donated all proceeds to the foundation. She approached Elliot with a copy for him to sign. "I'm not the one who should be signing books," Elliot protested. "You're exactly the one," Sarah replied. "Your story matters. Not because you're perfect, but because you're real. You showed America that heroism doesn't require superpowers or wealth or status. It just requires choosing what's right over what's easy." As the sun set over Manhattan, Elliot stood on the roof of the Marcus Stone Center with Victoria, looking out over the city. Maya was downstairs with other children, playing in the new community space they'd created. "Do you ever regret it?" Victoria asked quietly. "That moment in the courtroom when you could have stayed silent and kept your job?" Elliot thought about everything that had happened. The terror of the attack, the sleepless nights, the feeling of his daughter trembling in his arms as bullets shattered windows. But he also thought about Maya's pride in her father, about the foundation that would help hundreds of people, about Marcus Stone's legacy being honored, about justice being served. "No," he said firmly. "I don't regret it for a second." Victoria nodded, her own eyes distant with memory. "I lost everything once," she said. "My son, my innocence, my belief that the world was fair. But you gave me something back, Elliot. You gave me faith that good people still exist." "We all exist," Elliot replied. "We're just usually invisible." "Not anymore." Victoria gestured to the building below them, to the hundreds of people gathering for the ceremony. "Not anymore." The ceremony began with a moment of silence for Marcus Stone. His family was there, his wife, his 2 teenage sons, standing beside Victoria as she unveiled a bronze statue of Marcus in the lobby. It showed him not in his security gear, but in his Navy SEAL uniform, representing service and sacrifice. Then Elliot was called to speak. He walked to the podium, looking out at the sea of faces. Some were powerful people, politicians, business leaders, celebrities. But most were ordinary folks. His people. The invisible army of janitors and security guards and cafeteria workers and maintenance staff who kept the world running while rarely being noticed. 3 months ago, Elliot began, his voice steady. "I was emptying trash cans in a courthouse. I was nobody. Invisible. Just another janitor in a blue uniform that people looked through rather than at." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But I wasn't nobody. None of us are nobody. Every person matters. Every voice counts. And when you see something wrong, you have a choice. Stay silent and safe or speak up and face the consequences." He looked at Maya in the crowd, her eyes shining with love and pride. "I'm not going to lie to you and say choosing justice is easy. I lost my jobs. My daughter and I were hunted by killers. A good man died protecting us. There were moments when I wondered if speaking the truth was worth the cost." His voice grew stronger. "But then I look at my daughter and I remember why I did it. Because she needs to grow up in a world where people stand up for what's right, where corruption doesn't win, where one person with courage can change everything." The crowd was completely silent, hanging on every word. "This center isn't about me. It's about all of us. It's about every person who ever wanted to do the right thing but was afraid. It's about supporting each other when we make that choice. Because you shouldn't have to choose between your conscience and your livelihood. You shouldn't have to sacrifice everything to stand for justice." He looked at Victoria, who was openly crying now. "And it's about understanding that we're all connected. A billionaire and a janitor, a security chief and a little girl. We're all just people trying to do our best in a complicated world. When we support each other, when we stand together, that's when real change happens." Elliot's voice dropped to something quieter, more intimate. "My name is Elliot Monroe. I'm 52 years old. I'm a single father. I spent 14 years as a janitor, and I'm proud of that work. I'm proud of every floor I mopped, every toilet I cleaned, every trash can I emptied. Because honest work has dignity. Every job matters. Every person has value." He raised his voice for the final words. "So do everyone watching. everyone listening. If you see injustice, speak up. If you witness corruption, report it. If someone needs defending, defend them. Yes, it might cost you, but silence costs more. It costs your soul. It costs your children's future. It costs the kind of world we want to live in. The applause started slowly, then built into a thunderous standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. People were crying, cheering, holding up their phones to capture this moment. But Elliot only had eyes for Maya, who pushed through the crowd to run into his arms. He lifted her up, holding her tight, and whispered in her ear, "I love you, baby girl, and I hope I made you proud." "You always make me proud, Daddy," she whispered back. "Always." 5 years later, the Marcus Stone Center had grown beyond anyone's expectations. It now had branches in 12 cities, had helped over 3,000 whistleblowers and witnesses, and had become a model for corporate accountability worldwide. Elliot Monroe, now 57, still worked as director of community outreach. He'd never wanted Victoria's money or status, just the opportunity to help people who reminded him of himself. Maya was 17, a straight-A student preparing for college with a full scholarship to MIT. She wanted to study engineering and social justice. "I want to build systems that protect good people," she'd told her father, "like someone once did for us." Victoria Ashford had stepped back from day-to-day management of her company, focusing instead on philanthropy and reform. She and Elliot had become genuine friends, meeting every month for coffee, two people from different worlds who'd found common ground in shared trauma and mutual respect. Gerald Hutchinson had finally found redemption through service, training hundreds of young lawyers to never make his mistake. And in federal prison, Robert Langston served his sentence with the knowledge that the empire he'd built had been destroyed by a janitor with integrity and a billionaire who'd refused to quit. On the 5th anniversary of the trial, Elliot returned to the federal courthouse, not as a defendant or witness, but as a guest speaker for a law school ethics class. As he walked through the marble halls, he passed the current janitor, a young man in his 20s, pushing a cleaning cart. Their eyes met, and Elliot nodded with respect. The young janitor smiled and nodded back, because he understood what Elliot had proven 5 years ago, that every person matters, every voice counts, and sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one nobody expected. The invisible man who chose to be seen, the janitor who defended a billionaire, the father who taught his daughter that integrity is worth more than safety, and the ordinary man who proved that heroism doesn't require wealth or status or power. It just requires courage. The end.